How did Devon Larratt manage to defeat Denis CYPLENKOV despite being far weaker than him in many areas? Today, we're going to take a more in-depth look at Denis vs. Devon at East vs. West 10. I think this match is a near perfect technical performance from Devon and deserves closer study. We are going to look at the key moments in this match that led to Devon's victory. Firstly, one of the most important aspects of this match was the depth of grip Devon obtained in the setup. A deep grip would mean that you push your hand as far forward as possible past your opponent's hand, and you are starting with more wrist-to-wrist contact. A shallow grip, on the other hand, is the opposite. You are avoiding wrist-to-wrist contact at all costs. The deeper the grip is, the easier it is for both you and your opponent to bend your wrist. Going into this match, Devon was not quite sure how deep of a grip he would take. If he took a really deep grip, this would help him maintain his cup, as well as making it easier for him to rise up and over the top of Denis. However, this would also be very risky, as it could result in Denis being able to force Devon into a hook. Because this is exactly what happened the last time Devon faced Denis. Denis's wrist flexor was so strong that he just forced Devon into a hook every single round and crushed him. Despite the potential risk, we see Devon get as deep of a grip as possible in this match. We see him pushing his pinky finger as far forward and as high as possible. When the first ready go happens, we see why Devon did this. Notice how much higher Devon's hand is than Denis's hand. If Devon had taken a shallow grip, the slip would have been a lot more even. But the depth of grip Devon achieved allowed him to rise up and over the top of Denis's hand, giving him full control. Next, we look at the first go inside of straps. Devon's still looking for depth in the setup and getting his knuckles as high as possible, just like outside of straps. Upon the first ready go in straps, we see that Devon's knuckles are higher than Denis's once again. This will force Denis to hold on to Devon. Now, something super important happens right after this. Devon did something that he normally never does, but it hugely impacted the match. Off the go, Denis starts to back pressure the match to his side of the table. He drags his elbow all the way back to the very back of the pad. Now, most of the time, Devon is dragging his own elbow all the way to the back of the pad as well, but Devon does not do that in this match. Devon actually follows Denis in this match by moving his elbow forward to the very front of the pad. I think Devon likely felt that Denis's back pressure was stronger than his own, and if he drug his elbow back himself, Devon's bicep angle would have opened up and the height of his knuckles would have dropped. This would have made it way harder for Devon to go over the top in this match. Fortunately, Devon recognizes this immediately and he shoves his elbow to the very front of the pad. Now, a balance point is found between Devon and Denis. Denis cannot drag any further back and Devon cannot push any further forward, but Devon has the high hand spot from this position. From here, Devon does another thing that he almost never does. He starts hitting, like a lot. Devon hits Denis sideways 20 times in a row in round 1 of this match. And this is an excellent display from Devon Larratt of perfect efficiency. Everyone will be stronger and have better endurance during an isometric exercise as opposed to an isotonic exercise. Devon is in a nearly isometric position here. The angle of his elbow and his wrist joint pretty much stay exactly the same throughout all of these hits. Denis, on the other hand, is doing the exact opposite. Devon rips through his arm angle, but then he gives Denis his arm angle back. But then he rips through it again immediately after this. So Denis is essentially doing a max effort curl followed by a forced negative rep that is far greater than his 1 rep max. The amount of wear and tear being put into Denis's arm is off the charts right now. And on top of that, Devon is doing the exact same thing with Denis's wrist flexor. He's opening it and closing it, opening it and closing it, over and over and over until there's nothing left. I don't know if Devon just had the number 20 in his head or if he just stopped hitting once he felt that Denis was getting really tired. Either way, this resulted in Denis losing a huge amount of his power. Devon had effectively gassed out Denis's bicep and wrist flexor at this point, but now he begins to bring his shoulder forward and tax Denis's pronator as well. Now, Devon has improved his own efficiency by even more, as he is now relying on his bones not breaking to generate force. Your bones don't really gas out over time, so as long as Devon's arm doesn't snap in half, he could pretty much sit in this position indefinitely. He increases the depth of his grip even further, and Denis literally has nowhere to go from here. he is totally trapped. But Denis is so insanely strong that even in this terrible position, only holding on with his bicep, Devon is still unable to pin him with the press. He has to roll back outside in order to get the pin. Now, I'm not sure whether Devon was physically unable to pin Denis with the press, or if he just felt that the can opener was an easier lane to victory. Either way, Denis's bicep is still really strong. Denis's bicep is the thing that is the most difficult for his opponents to deal with. One of the problems is that even if you take center table from Denis, you still have to pin him. And oftentimes, as you get close to that pin pad, your wrist is going to start to crack. And that's exactly what Denis wants. But Devon did not allow this to happen. This is because Devon did not rush the pin whatsoever, but instead he worked really hard to set himself up for an easy pin at the end of the match. He never rushed anything. Let's take a look at this alternative angle right here. Notice how deep and how high Devon's grip is. Denis is pretty much dad moving Devon at this point, meaning that Denis does not really have any access to attack Devon's wrist flexor using his bicep. If the webbing height was a lot more even, Devon's wrist may have cracked back as he tried to pin, but Devon slowly increased his webbing height throughout the match, resulting in a position where his wrist flexor is very protected from Denis's bicep. There is one more aspect of this match that I think is super important, and that is that Devon dictated the range of motion the match would take place in. Notice how on these hits, Devon is allowing the match to go really far back onto his losing side of the table. In other words, the hits are taking place from a more defensive range of motion of, let's say, 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock, instead of a more offensive range of motion like 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock. This may not seem like a huge deal, but this made a big difference in the match. Denis is an arm wrestler who has a really sticky spot toward the end of his arm's range of motion, meaning it's way harder to pin him than it is to win center table from him. If Devon had tried to hit more toward the end range of motion, he would have been a lot less efficient since that is Denis's stronger angle. But as we saw, he was purposely working through more of the center table range of motion, which is Denis's weaker position. This led to a much higher degree of efficiency for Devon. Devon still pumped up Denis's arm like crazy, but he made it a little bit easier on himself in the process. So was there anything Denis could have done to stop this? There's actually a pretty simple answer. The whole concept of hitting over and over again employed by Devon only works if your opponent tries to prevent it from happening. Denis was trying to keep the match on his side of the table the whole time. This is what allowed Devon to rip through his arm. Denis was also trying to bend his wrist the whole time, and this is what allowed Devon to rip through Denis's wrist. If Denis had simply allowed his arm to pivot and swing to the losing side of the table every time Devon hit, Devon's whole strategy would not have done anything. Similarly, if Denis had allowed his wrist to go back upon each hit, Devon's strategy wouldn't have worked. Blasting through your opponent over and over like this only works if your opponent makes the mistake of trying to prevent it. So if these guys have a rematch at some point in the future, I would really like to see Denis take a higher grip in the setup and focusing on posting back pressure and wrist rise. He could allow his wrist to go back on purpose instead of burning energy while attempting the hopeless task of bending your wrist against Devon LARRATT. I think Denis's particular build will lend itself more toward this strategy over the one we saw Denis implement against Devon. So overall, this was an awesome performance from Devon. This is a great demonstration of how to beat someone who is much stronger than you in a lot of areas. Denis's bicep is way stronger than Devon's, but Devon overcame this discrepancy by taking away Denis's access to his bicep. Devon is not a weak person by any means, but I think he won this match in the mind more so than with his arm. In arm wrestling, if the strength levels are close enough, the sport begins to drift away from being a powerlifting meet and starts to become more and more of a chess match.